Statement on behalf of the youth delegates. You have the floor.
Dear colleagues, we, the youth delegates, first want to thank you for your excellent work and your commitment to preparing this important report. Very thorough report as well on the European Charter of Local Self-Government and how it can be used to establish this environmental and climate protection as a fundamental right. Because human rights are strongly interlinked with climate change because of its effect on not just the environment but also our own well-being. And this is why that the failure of governments to act on the climate crisis in the face of overwhelming scientific evidence may well be the biggest intergenerational human rights violation in history. So, the escalation of climate change, pollution, the loss of biodiversity are posing a serious risk to fundamental rights. In particular, the right to life and also the right to health. So, this report calls on local and regional authorities to further address climate change and environmental protection while also adopting a human rights approach. And we welcome this approach, and we invite you to be even bolder in your continued actions. Because how does climate change actually threaten human rights across communities? Well, first of all, climate change affects the right to life itself, because it threatens the life and safety of billions of people across the globe. And the most obvious example is extreme weather-related events, storms, floods, and wildfires. Also, second, climate change affects the right to health, as I mentioned. And according to the IPCC, there are major health impacts of climate change. For example, increased risk of diseases because of waves, heat waves and fires, undernutrition risks as a result of diminished food production, also diseases from food, from water, and vector-borne diseases. And also, finally, post-traumatic stress even as a result of natural disasters. So, also, thirdly, climate change also affects the right to housing, for example. There are millions of people that are getting their homes destroyed because of climate change, leaving them displaced. And most importantly, the migrant crisis to date pale in comparison to those we will have to deal with in the future in the face of climate change. So, climate change is not just about the environment, it's also about our human rights. It's about sanitation also. It's melting snow and ice, reduced rainfall, higher temperatures, rising sea levels. They're all affecting the quality of, for example, water resources. One fact, one figure, is that already 785 million people across the world do not have access to a source of water or sanitation that is likely to be safe. And climate change will only make this worse, of course. So, where do we go from here? This is difficult. Well, we can start by establishing this fundamental right to live in a clean environment and to ensure adequate procedural rights also for citizens. And one way of this is climate litigation. And it's now actually quite commonly used in invoking fundamental rights, namely the right to life. And so courts can actually also play a pivotal role in climate policy. And citizens and NGOs are advocating for the recognition of specific climate or environmental change rights in favor of citizens and interest groups. This could be participating in policymaking, also the right to challenge decisions before the courts or challenging the lack of decisions, but also the negative impacts on climate change, for example, the right to life, as mentioned. And two highlights is one Dutch case, the Agenda case, where 1,000 citizens claimed against their government that national climate policy was inadequate. And the court agreed, and they recognized a duty of care owed by the government. This was historical. The second example is in Germany from last year. The Constitutional Court ruled that the government's climate protection measures are insufficient to protect future generations, after a complaint brought also by environmentally minded citizens. So, and there are many more cases before national courts, before the courts also at EU level, and also a number of court cases are pending at the European Court of Human Rights here. So, As these present recommendations, they rightly outline environmental rights, so to say, are accepted in a political setting often, but difficulties arise when we try to make it into a working legal instrument or working right. So, but one note to that is that the European Convention on Human Rights, when that was first written, that was started as a political instrument, a political document. And that turned, with a lot of political will and great efforts, into a true legal instrument. And it is time again, in our opinion, to find that political will and to adapt to the realities of this climate crisis. So we support these recommendations, and we want to engage local and regional authorities in this environmental decision-making. Also, we want to establish a general duty to governments to protect the environment, as both this negative obligation and a positive obligation. And also we want them to have sufficient competences and financial resources to act. But yeah, the good thing is that the right to a clean and safe environment is conquering more and more jurisdictions across Europe and in the world. And the Court of Justice of the EU has actually also recognized some important parts of this right, and various countries' constitutions actually enshrine to varying extent, the right to a healthy environment. One example is Bolivia, that actually goes as far as enshrining in their constitution all of nature and equal right to humans. That is quite historical. So, but the European Convention on Human Rights and the protocols that have followed do not have this right explicitly stated. Nor is there a global treaty of some form recognizing human rights in the context of climate change. But nevertheless, the case law of the Court of Justice, the Court of Human Rights, has increasingly underlined this connection. They have underlined the positive and negative obligations, and also the obligation to criminalize even the most serious conducts of conducts affecting the environment. And actually, this court has more than 100 environmental related cases about pollution, about access to information, and natural disasters. So that's already a good start. But what I want to say to you as local and regional authority is that you also have a responsibility, and you have a room to act as well. For example, in the UK, there's research showing that 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions from the UK are dependent on sectors influenced by local governments, policies, or partnerships. So within all your competences at regional and national level, regional and local level, you are in a unique and actually privileged situation to do something. You have a significant role to play because of your proximity to the citizens and their everyday lives. And also, due to the scale of the policy changes needed, citizens need to feel ownership also of these policy changes because they are big. And so despite the Paris Agreement and similar commitments, we are still faced with a sort of institutional passivity and the lack of adequate climate action. So that's where you as regional and local governments can play a role. So finally, our call for action as the next generation, but also I think already the present generation, is that the European Convention of Human Rights is a great instrument, but we think that your report is underlining a very, very important point. And we, of course, hope that it will get adopted in this Congress session. But we also call on this Congress to support some coordination activities or actions between local and regional governments in Europe, because we need meaningful action on all levels, not just one municipality and one municipality or region. We need coordination. And here we think the Congress could play a big role. And then my very final point, and thank you for listening, is that I invite you to listen to some further recommendations which my fellow youth delegates are eager to propose in the coming debate. And if we don't have time for all of it, I hope that you will go after the session and talk to them, because they really, really worked on some excellent recommendations. And they are about the role of economic structures in exploitation of the environment, and also the influence of corporate interests and so on. So thank you very much for your attention, and good luck with the voting on this report. I fully support it.
Thank you, Elkær Nicots. I think you spoke well, and you can hear it on the applause that everybody agrees on that. Thank you very much for that. You challenged me more or less.